She is standing in her backyard in Scottsdale, Arizona. It's just past 8:30 in the evening. The air is dry and cool, the way March air gets in a desert when the sun has just gone down. She came outside to look for a comet. Everyone in the neighborhood has been talking about it. Hale-Bopp, passing close enough to see without a telescope if you know where to look. She finds it, and then she stops. Because moving across the sky, slow and absolutely silent, is something else entirely. A shape. A massive dark shape with lights arranged in a V. 5 lights, maybe 6. Each one steady and bright, not blinking the way planes blink. Moving south. Moving with the kind of purpose that doesn't feel mechanical. She doesn't scream. She doesn't run inside. She just stands there, neck craned back, watching it pass overhead. And she has the same thought that hundreds of other people across Arizona are having at the exact same moment. That is not a plane. This is still unexplained. Brief explorations of unsolved mysteries. My name is Mark. March 13th, 1997, a Thursday night, Arizona. The Hale-Bopp comet was making one of its rare close approaches to Earth, and the timing was perfect. Clear skies across the southwest. People were out in their yards, on their rooftops, at telescope clubs, in parking lots. The whole state was looking up. Which means that when something unusual moved across those skies, there were an unusual number of witnesses. The Phoenix Lights, as they would come to be called, generated over 700 documented reports to the National UFO Reporting Center. Witnesses included nurses, teachers, pilots, police officers, a former military man or two, and eventually, the governor of Arizona himself. The sighting stretched from the Nevada border all the way through Tucson. That is a corridor of roughly 300 miles, or about 480 kilometers. Newspapers covered it. Local news covered it. And then years later, national outlets covered it again and again, each time adding a little more texture, a little more drama, a little more mystery. It became the most widely witnessed UFO event in American history, and it is still, depending on who you ask, either completely explained or completely unexplainable. Here's what makes the case more complicated than most people realize. Not everyone who saw something that night saw the same thing. Most people, when they hear the Phoenix Lights, picture one event. A massive craft, maybe a mile wide, hovering silently over a major American city, while hundreds of thousands of people went about their Thursday night. That is the version that got on television. And that is the version that became mythology. But the night of March 13th contained two distinctive events, and separating them is the only way to understand either one. The first event began earlier than most people know, and further north than anyone usually mentions. At approximately 6:55 p.m., reports started coming in from Henderson, Nevada, a V-shaped formation of lights moving south. By 8:15 p.m., it was over Prescott. By 8:30, it had reached Phoenix. It crossed roughly 200 miles, or 320 kilometers, in about 30 minutes. Do the math, and you get an average speed of around 400 miles per hour, or 640 kilometers per hour. Then nothing for 90 minutes. Then, at approximately 10 p.m., a second set of lights appeared. This time they were stationary. A row of bright amber orbs hovering over the Sierra Estrella mountain range southwest of the city. These lights didn't move. They didn't speed anywhere. They just hung there, brilliant and silent, slowly fading one by one over the course of several minutes. Those second lights were captured on home video. That footage is what you have seen if you have seen the famous images. That footage is what the television specials show when they talk about the Phoenix Lights. And this is where the story gets genuinely interesting, because those two events almost certainly had two completely different explanations, and almost no one in the media ever stopped to say so. Here's the detail that should make you pause. A 21-year-old amateur astronomer named Mitch Stanley was outside that night in Scottsdale with a Dobsonian mirror telescope. 10-inch mirror at 60 times magnification. That instrument gathers roughly 1,500 times more light than the naked eye and resolves detail the naked eye simply cannot see. Stanley trained it on the V formation during the 8:30 p.m. pass. What he saw were individual aircraft. Each point of light resolved into a pair of lights mounted on squarish wings, conventional planes flying in formation. He said it clearly and on the record. Quote, "They were planes. There's no way I could have mistaken that," unquote. He told his mother, he told people who asked, but Stanley's account never became the headline, because it was 1997. An amateur astronomer confirms military jets doesn't sell papers the way other headlines do. So here's where the night spills into versions of itself. The most straightforward explanation for those 10 p.m. stationary lights, the ones on video, is military flares, specifically LUU-2BBs, illumination flares, dropped by A-10 aircraft from the Maryland Air National Guard flying a training exercise out of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base near Tucson. The flares were dropped over a military range called North Tack at an unusually high altitude, around 15,000 feet, or about 4,500 meters. That altitude made them visible far beyond their intended area. The Sierra Estrella Mountains sat between Phoenix and the range, which is why the lights appeared to hover just above the ridgeline. As each flare burned out, it disappeared, one by one. The compelling part of this explanation is that it is well documented. The Maryland Air National Guard confirmed that exercise. The flare type is consistent with the appearance of the lights on video. The timing lines up. Aviation experts looked at the footage and said, yes, that is consistent with LUU-2BB burn signatures. What it doesn't explain is the 8:30 p.m. formation. Military flares don't travel 200 miles at 400 miles per hour. Flares also don't hold a V shape across state lines. The flare explanation works for the second event, and only the second event, and yet it was applied to the whole night, which is exactly how the confusion took root. Now, if you are looking for the version that settles the 8:30 p.m. event, the telescope account for Mitch Stanley is your strongest candidate. Aviation experts who reviewed witness descriptions after the fact suggested the formation was consistent with A-10 Thunderbolts or T-37 trainer aircraft flying in a loose V. Formation flying with a single active transponder, which is standard military practice, would explain why civilian radar at Sky Harbor Airport picked up nothing. Civilian air traffic control systems read transponder pings. If only the lead aircraft is broadcasting, the rest of the formation is invisible to that system. That is a procedural reality, not a conspiracy. The compelling part of this explanation is that it has a witness with a telescope who made a contemporaneous identification. That is as close to physical evidence as this case gets. The weakness is that Stanley's testimony went almost entirely unused by investigators, including by a Phoenix city councilwoman who was publicly calling for an inquiry. No one followed up with him formally. Whatever the reason, the most scientifically grounded witness in this case was effectively sidelined. What would help settle this? The classified flight records from Luke Air Force Base in Davis-Monthan for the evening of March 13th? Some researchers say those records were requested and came back incomplete. Others say the information is there, just never widely circulated. The theory that keeps surfacing among serious investigators, though not in the mainstream coverage, is that what happened that night is actually an object lesson in memory contamination. Hundreds of people saw something real. Some saw military planes. Some saw military flares. Some saw both. And then, in the days and week that followed, as stories circulated and news coverage aired, those separate memories began to merge. Witnesses who saw the 8:30 formation began describing hovering. Witnesses who saw the 10 p.m. lights began estimating the size of a craft they never actually saw. The famous mile-wide craft description almost certainly emerged in the aftermath, not in the moment. There is a psychological research on exactly this kind of cross-contamination, how people in mass witness events absorb the accounts of others and integrate them into their own recollections without realizing it. It's not dishonesty. It's just how memory works, especially under conditions of surprise and emotional arousal. The weakness of this explanation is that it still doesn't fully account for the witnesses who described the V formation before any television coverage, before any community chatter, in real-time phone calls to radio stations and reporting centers. Some of those descriptions are remarkably consistent. And then there's the account that almost nobody knows what to do with. Fife Symington, governor of Arizona in 1997, held a press conference in June of that year. He brought his chief of staff out in handcuffs, wearing a rubber alien mask. He laughed. The crowd laughed. The hysteria, as he called it, was diffused. 10 years later, he said he had seen the craft himself. He described it as enormous, inexplicable. He said its geometric shape was too precise, too symmetrical to be flares. He said he mocked the event publicly because he thought that is what the state needed to hear. Whether you believe that was responsible crisis management or something more complicated depends a lot on what you already think about government officials and disclosure. The cynical read is that Symington, a few years removed from office and a federal fraud conviction, had nothing left to lose and perhaps something to gain by repositioning himself as a credible witness. The more sympathetic read is that he was a man who couldn't reconcile what he saw with the official narrative and finally said so. Either way, his reversal added a layer to this case that no amount of flare documentation fully peels back. The extraordinary possibility, the one this case is most famous for, is that what passed over Arizona that night was something built somewhere other than Earth, or built on Earth by someone who isn't talking. That a structured, silent craft the size of multiple football fields moved through restricted airspace over a major American city, was seen by hundreds of witnesses across the hundreds of miles, and was then buried beneath a press conference and a rubber alien mask. Serious ufologists point out that 400 miles per hour is not an impossible speed for conventional aircraft, but the silence is harder to dismiss. Multiple witnesses with no reason to coordinate describe the same thing. No engine noise, none. At low altitude over populated areas, military jets are not quiet. The silence is the part of the 8:30 event that the formation of 810's explanation has never fully absorbed. So what would settle it, if anything could? Radar data from military installation? Pilot testimony under oath? Possibly nothing at all. She is still standing in her backyard in Scottsdale, neck craned back. The lights have passed. Whatever they were, they are gone now, moving south into the dark. The comet she came outside to find is still up there, cold and distant and perfectly explainable. And she goes inside. She picks up the phone. She's going to tell someone about this. 700 people do the same thing that night. And 27 years later, we are still not entirely sure what they saw, or whether the explanation we have is the explanation that fits. Maybe it was planes. Maybe it was flares. Maybe it was both. And the only real mystery is how easily two separate events became one enormous story that a state couldn't stop telling itself. Or maybe Mitch Stanley's telescope saw 6 or 7 lights clearly, and whatever was at the front of the formation wasn't something a 10-inch mirror could resolve. That gap, the small, stubborn gap between what we can explain and what we cannot, is where cases like this live. And it is, I think, exactly where this case should stay. This has been Still Unexplained, created and hosted by myself, Mark Evanoff. Thanks for listening.